All right, hour 3 of the program, and I want to take you back to Monday. I know for a lot of you, it was a holiday, it's Labor Day, so perhaps you weren't on your normal routine, not listening to the show. And during the panel, we talked about Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada, and if he should be in the debates. And from there, I was getting messages about immigration and how they appreciated Maxime Bernier and his stance on immigration. And I was getting, through the discussion, I don't know where it came from, but it came out of nowhere. I'm getting texters who were sending me these anti-immigrant, that immigrants are taking our jobs, and I was genuinely surprised because I didn't know how we got from point A to point B. So on Tuesday, I open up La Presse, and in La Presse Plus, there's an editorial from our next guest, and the editorial is about the imaginary evil of immigration. So when I saw this, I said, we got to speak to this guy. Joining me on the line is Vincent Geloso, assistant professor of economics at Bates College. Vincent, how are you?
Very well.
So listen, you heard what I just said. There's a reason why we reached out to you on the program, and I think the timing was just right. So why don't you tell me, why don't you give me the gist of it? For those of us who haven't read your piece in La Presse, what's your premise here? What do you think when it comes to immigration and how Canadians think of it in this day and age?
That the political discourse that exists right now towards immigration is so disconnected from what experts who work on this are saying, and it's very much outside the window of expert opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The best example of this is the idea that immigrants constitute a net burden for Canada. And for that, there is no evidence of them being a burden or a benefit in terms of government finance. There is actually evidence that it's a wash.
Gotcha. Okay, so if it's a wash, is there a reason to do it if it's a wash? I'll just play devil's advocate here.
Well, this is because if you were to say that, you'd be missing a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's a wash from the government's perspective. They don't get more revenue and they don't get more expenses, right? When immigrants come, they increase the size of the market. They allow us to specialize much more. And so it makes natives better off. It increases the income of natives of the country because they can specialize more. A good example of that is if unqualified workers from an emerging country come to Canada and they increase, let's say, for example, the services of daycare. So there's a greater supply of daycare services. There's a greater ability of mothers to return earlier on the job market, thus earning higher incomes faster than they would have had absent these services. Same way would work if the doctor is heavily qualified. It's a heavily qualified immigrant doctor who comes from another country, reducing wait times so that people can return to work faster. The effect of immigration is that it boosts very mildly the benefits to natives. And that is already important in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
The estimates go from somewhere between gains of 0.3% of your income to as high as 1.25%. So that on the whole, this extra revenue from natives washes out some of the cost that comes per immigrant. The other part is we should never forget the benefits for immigrants themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If I take a guy from Haiti, and I don't change anything from him, he's the same exact person, and for some magical reason he's brought to Canada, he's 10 times richer. Not because he's 10 times better, it's because he's better matched with better capital and better institutions. So his labor is better valued when he's allowed to immigrate. So this is why economists, when they speak of immigration, they say, look, there is $1 billion bill, $1 trillion bill on the sidewalk that we can pick just by letting people move from bad institution countries to good institutions country where their labor of these workers will be better valued. And because of that, we'll pick that $1 trillion bill on the sidewalk. It's a huge benefit. Immigration is one of the greatest source of wealth creation in that regard. And the immigrants get the bigger share of it.
Mm-hmm.
Natives get a small share of it, and government gets nothing. Their net financial situation don't change.
Speaking with Vincent Geloso, assistant professor of economics at Bates College, we're talking about immigration and how it impacts the economy. One other thing I get pushback on, Vincent, is how immigration somehow lowers wages. It brings...
That's bullshit. I'm sorry to swear live on. This
This is what I want to hear. I need you to preach,
this is
Vincent.
Violation of Econ 101.
Uh-huh.
It is true that when immigrants come, they increase the supply of labor. Right? So people think, oh, yeah, more work or lower wages. But the immigrants, when they come, they consume stuff. If they consume stuff, they increase the demand for labor as well. So that if you increase the demand for labor, you're also increasing wages. So immigration has its own offsetting effect on any wage decreases that happen. And the additional effect is what I mentioned earlier. When there's more people, we have more room to specialize. When we have more room to specialize, we can more easily increase our income, right? So the example of a greater supply of doctors coming from as immigrant doctor will reduce wait times. Wait times allow us to go back to work faster, right?
Yeah.
A greater supply of daycare workers allows mother to return to work faster. They can better specialize in their work rather than child rearing. A larger population increases the range of specialization possibility, which pushes up the productivity of every worker. So that on average, we find that the shift of demand for labor is actually slightly bigger than the shift of the supply of workers. So that we're better off, so that there's a net benefit from immigration. It's very small, right, for natives, right? The bulk of the benefits from immigration really go to immigrants. But
now,
there are small but not negligible benefits that go to workers who are in the host country.
Now, what
that
do you
would be Canadians?
And what do you make when you hear Canadian politicians? Of course, as I said off the top, the impetus to this interview was Maxime Bernier and his anti-quote unquote mass immigration stance. What do you think when you hear Canadian politicians that are saying let's bring these numbers down?
Okay, so this is where there is a slight set of nuances that are necessary. When we check immigration policy, there are some friction. So, for example, we find that wages go up for roughly 85 to 90% of worker at the low bound. At the high bound, everybody gains. But sometimes we have some doubts over, for example, high school dropouts are hindered by a greater supply of unqualified immigrants. So there seems to be these little gaps, so that there are small costs from immigration, but that they're concentrated on a few groups. But that doesn't require us to reduce the number of immigrants. There's actually really easy sets of policies that can be done that allow us to keep the massive benefits of immigration while reducing the cost. People like Maxime Bernier, for a guy who used to talk that much about economics, he's saying, let's reduce the cost by reducing the benefits as well. What I'm saying is just focus on reducing the cost. You don't have to change the benefits. So, for example, if we're worried about the lower skilled workers who are sometimes, and this is debated between economists, between experts who work on this, is are they really hurt? We're not sure, but let's say they are. Let's pretend that I'm on the side that says they are. You can just use some of the extra that comes from the ones that actually gain amongst the workers and compensate the ones who are hurt. You don't need to put a wall around borders to help out those people. You just need to take a part of the benefits and transfer them.
Vincent?
Same thing for other arguments. There's always a series of small keyhole solutions that will allow us to preserve the benefits of immigration by reducing the costs. If I'm assuming that people who are anti-immigration are accurate in their empirical statements about the costs.
Vincent, I have one more question for you. It goes back to what you just said about nuance, and it's important. I only got around 30 seconds, though. But when it comes to quote-unquote illegal immigrants, what can we is there anything different to that? To an economist, does it change if it's a quote-unquote illegal immigrant or not?
It changes nothing for an economist.
Yeah.
For economists, a worker is a worker is a worker. That is illegal or legal is completely the definition of what a politician decides to be. But from the perspective of an economist, if I hire someone to work either as a university professor in Kingston or as a maid, it doesn't change anything. It's still a transaction between two parties, and if that transaction takes place, it is because it's mutually beneficial to both parties in that transaction. The illegal versus legal is largely one that politicians want to entertain for the purposes of making more palatable their opposition to immigration.
Vincent Geloso, Assistant Professor of Economics at Bates College. Thanks for the time, Vincent.